Okay, good morning. This shiur and breakfast is sponsored by Tzvi Wolf in honor of David Dayan bringing breakfast every week.
That means you're back.
So the source sheet is actually in the chat. Unfortunately, I was not able to print out the thing. So if you're on your phone, hopefully no one will text you. But but if you want to follow along, I give you a heter. It could be on your phone during the shiur. Today's topic is praying for the government. We're going to do two parts. If we're lucky, we'll get through both of them. I don't know if we will. Maybe we'll do part one today, part two a different week. But we'll try to cover two parts. Number one is, should we be praying for the government of Canada, which is where we live right now? And the part two would be the debate over Reishit Tzmichat Geulateinu. Has the big redemption already begun? And the debate about the prayer for the state of Israel. Okay, so I put on the source sheet Hanosein Teshua Lamlachim, which is the typical formulation of the prayer for the government. But if you really take a look at any art scroll siddur, you can see the current iteration of this prayer.
Do you want a coffee?
Sure. Thank you so much, Chaim.
That's Chaim Levy. Chaim Levy got the coffee for the record.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
Yeah. You have to take a picture. So you'll see that different siddurim have maybe a little bit different nuschos of it, but many siddurim have it. And I just wanted to start with an interesting example in terms of we know that I guess there's a lot of issues with current government here, and who's going to be the prime minister is an open question. But in 2017, just moving to the United States for a moment, there was a statement made and a policy change by a rabbi in New York, Rabbi Jonathan Muscat, and he proposed to revise the traditional prayer.
You know he's from here, right? Yeah.
Are you serious?
He grew up in Dubai.
I didn't know that.
Family member.
For real? Oh, that's Elazar.
His parents were here. They passed away. Yeah.
Oh, different person. Okay. So Rabbi Jonathan Muscat, because he was upset, we'll get into some of the details of the discussion, but he proposed to change the traditional prayer, and significantly for the political context that was happening in that time, he felt that to sort of just generally praise the office of the president, but not to give particular honorifics and, shall we say, sure, thank you. Not specific to the person, he made it more general and to give them wisdom but not to take down some of the. Now you have to take a picture of the shiur so that people know, see people that see the surrounding. Thank you, l'chaim. So he made it a little bit less, flattering is I guess the good way of terming it. And so was this the correct decision? What is there a reason to pray for the government or not to pray for the government? If we don't like what the government's doing, should we still pray for them? This is what I want to discuss with you. So the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Beis, says as follows in your source sheet: Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim Omer, Havei Mispal B'Shlomo L'Shel Malchus. One should pray for the welfare of the government, She'el Mali Morah, for their fear that it inspires. In other words, it does. In some level of government is supposed to, create some sort of deterrent, better than anarchy. Ishis re'eu chayim below, then man would swallow up his friend alive. In other words, anarchy is much worse than even a bad government, and therefore we should pray for the welfare of the government. This is found also in Tanakh. Source number 3, Yirmiyahu Perik Lamites Pasuk Zayim. B'dirshu es shlom ha'ir asher higleisa eschem shama. You should seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you. V'hispalu ba'ada el Hashem, and pray for it to Hashem on its behalf. Ki b'shloma yeh lachem shalom. For in its prosperity you shall prosper. In other words, you are in Gullus, you are going into exile, you're going to live in a certain country. You should pray for that country because that it will benefit you because you are living there. And similarly, Ezra has a similar formulation that you should pray for the life of the king and for his sons. There was a movement to abolish this prayer. It seems to be in the 19th century. We dealt with the Chasam Sofer a few weeks ago. The Chasam Sofer, as we mentioned, is sort of the some of the fault lines between Orthodoxy and the other, let's say, forms of Judaism. He is sort of the linchpin, or maybe you call him the watershed moment. But in many ways, the Chasam Sofer defines and gives us some, some demarcations. And in the debate, that this is a completely different topic, but it's somewhat of in some certain way it's similar because it's about the traditions to follow. And he says that there was this movement to change the tefillah or to abolish the tefillah. And he says very strong language, and it's translated in a book that I utilized for some of the source material. You can take a look at your source sheet also for the source material. I always like to tell you where I get things from. In this book, he has a translation of this tshuva for the Chasam Sofer. It's actually Likutim. I don't know if it's originally in the Chuvas, but it's Simin Tzadi Hey. And he says, I'll just read it in translation. You can take a look. It's translated by Rabbi, I don't know if he's a rabbi actually. I don't think it's the same Avram Steinberg. But Avram Steinberg, there's another professor, Rabbi Avram Steinberg, and this one I think is someone else. But he translates it. He says, what caused the blood of Israel to be spilled like the water in ancient times? It was not God who caused this, heaven forbid. It was our leaders who caused this. Why? Because they did not train the nation to pray for the welfare of their land and the welfare of their king. And he says, some people, want to take this away, and this is completely inappropriate. And we should always, he says, the Chachamim and the Talmud, the Chacham of the Talmud, they warned us to pray. Rabbosneinu Shabbatalmud, this is the Hebrew in source number 5. He's here lehispal b'shlom b'shel malchus b'shlom artzam. Even if this people, though our people left their own land, he says the warning has not ceased to be being voiced by those who instruct us in halacha, the leaders of the nation, faithful shapers of our holy flock. And you can see in sources number 7 and 8, Rav Chaim Shmuel Hirsch in the commentary on his Siddur, and in the authorized daily prayer book, Dr. Joseph, or they usually refer to them as Doctor, but he was a rabbi also, but I think maybe it was the more formal way, I don't know, but Reverend, Dr. Reverend, or just Doctor, Joseph Hertz was the chief rabbi of England. In 1948, he put out an authorized prayer book, and he writes very strongly that loyalty to the state is ingrained in the Jewish character, and the Jew has often shown himself to be the intensive form of any nationality. And he writes that this idea of Hanosin Yeshua and the psukim from Tanakh are warnings against revolutionary intrigue. And he goes on to say that there's a concept of Dina al Demachus Adina, and we respect the government and we abide by its laws. And you can take a look. I just put in the RCA Siddur just because it's sort of like the emblematic North American Siddur, so you can take a look there. It has Tefillah L'Shlom HaMedina in source number 9. Seemingly an open and shut case. We have to pray for the government, and it doesn't appear to be any really dispute about this. Well, maybe there is. Maybe it's not such an open and shut case. So I found this is a fascinating discussion. We'll go into all the history of it, but Jonathan Sarna, who's a professor at Brandeis of history, Jewish history specifically, has a fascinating theory. I'm going to call it a theory, but I think you'll agree with me that it's very compelling. His theory, and he wrote this in an article in response to Rabbi Jonathan Muscat. He has a theory. I'll just introduce you to the theory and then we'll see it inside. He says that for many, many generations, the actual prayer for any government in Russia, in Hungary. The prayer for the government was a backhanded way to, we would say, just to give them a shtach. It was actually utilizing and quoting different psukim in a vague way to actually show that we're going to show them respect, but those who know that it's not actually legit. This is a very interesting theory, but I think you'll see he makes some compelling points about it. So let's take a look at source number 10. This was from an article in 2017 in response to Rabbi Muscat. Rather than altering traditional prayers, as Rabbi Muscat proposes, rabbis of old cleverly disguised their views of hated governments, displaying virtuosity in what the philosopher Leo Strauss called persecution and the art of writing. In other words, we can use there's different ways of this of disagreement and resistance against a government. Not all of it has to be explicit, but there's different ways of showing displeasure and disagreement with the government without outwardly, because it would probably be dangerous, without outwardly showing it. So, for example, a Russian siddur from the late Tsar era contains the traditional Hanotain Teshuah prayer for Nicholas, Alexandra, Queen Mother Maria, and Crown Priest Alexei. From I think I'm pronouncing it right. Any Russians here? Alexei. You don't know? You don't know. You have no idea. I don't know either. He says, who the prayer exalts in the loftiest tones. In other words, you'll see, if you look at the footnote, microscopic footnote, however, explains it according to the apocryphal book of Baruch. I believe it's not even a real, it's not a real quotation. Jews are enjoined to pray even for the life of the king Nebuchadnezzar. Through this tacit aside, so oblique that it eluded the watchful censor's pen, the siddur covertly linked the Tsar to one of the most despised of diaspora monarchs, even as it overtly celebrated his name in large black letters. So if you take a look, this is from the article, you can see it has Nikolai Alexandra, Maria, all these words over here. And at the bottom of the tefillah, take a look at that star over there. Baruch ben Neriah, I believe that's not even a real thing. I didn't research this, but I trust apocryphal book. I imagine it could be even from the apocrypha. I don't know what he means, but it could be that it never existed. Kasav mihagole el Yoshvi Yerushalayim. He wrote from the exile to the people of Yerushalayim. Lehispal achai Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel. What does that mean? It means that the Tsar is an evil person who we pray for. This great man who's wonderful. It's sort of like giving a little bit of a backhanded I don't know what the word is. There's a D word that I'm trying to think of. Not disdain. I can't think of the word. More than that. It's not disrepute. I'm thinking of a word where it's like not revolutionary yet, but it's sort of moving in that direction. Dissent. It's giving sort of this idea of we can't really outwardly express our opinion because it's not a free society, but we want to show that there's dissent that is there. So he wants to argue, Jonathan Sarna, that it was a subversive prayer. How does he know this? So take a look at this argument here. He writes, in its manifest language, exudes Jewish loyalty and faith allegiance. At the same time, its esoteric meaning, presumably recognized only by an elite core of well-educated worshippers, hints at spiritual resistance, a cultural strategy well known among those determined to maintain their self-respect in the face of religious persecution. In other words, we have to keep our own, sense of self-respect even when we're being disrespected. How do we do that? We're not going to risk our lives, but there's ways of showing dissent, of making these subversive prayers that are not outwardly subversive, but the people who know, right? V'hamevin yavin. Take a look. For example, the prayer begins with a verse modified from Psalm 144:10. Kuf nun dalid psukim yud aleph. Hanosin tishul amlachim hapotzeas David avdo micharev ra. To you who gives victory to kings, who rescues his servant David from the deadly sword. However, the next line, he does this a lot. It's always oftentimes the context of the psukim before and after. The next line in Psalms is not included in the prayer, but well known to Jews who recite it every Saturday night, and deeply revealing in terms of the prayer's hidden meaning reads, "Rescue me, save me," right? Pitzeni v'hatzilini miyad b'nei nechar, asher piem diber shav v'minam yamin shaker. Rescue me and save me from the hands of foreigners whose mouths speak lies and whose oaths are false. So if you know the next psukim, it's like a hanosin teshua v'chulu, right? It's almost like there's also part of the message is what is not written there. Rabbi Barry Schwartz has pointed to several, this is source number 12, more esoteric readings in the prayer, including Isaiah 43:16, which forms part of a chapter predicting the fall of Babylon, which on your source sheet you can see, Yeshaya Mem Gimel. So it says, Ko amar Hashem anosim b'yom derech u'mayim izim nisiva. Right, this said God who made a road through the sea and a path through mighty waters. But that's what it's mentioned in many of the prayers. But if you look at the next pasuk, Hamotzi rechem v'sus chayil v'izuv yachtav yishkevu bal yukumu doachu kapishtar chavu, that who destroyed the chariots and horses and all the mighty hosts, they lay down to rise no more. They were extinguished and quenched like a wick. So again, another context of destruction of another people. Further, he gives other examples in Yirmiyahu and other psukim in Yeshayahu that are quoted. My favorite one is it says in Uval Tzion Goel is the last. If you look at the what do we say at the last sentence? Uval Tzion Goel v'chein yiratzon v'namar amen. Right. So what does it say in Uval Tzion? It's talking about the Redeemer coming to Israel. But if you look at the psukim before Uval Tzion and Yeshaya and Nuntes, psukim Yudches and Yudtes, it says Ka'al Gemulos Ka'al Yishalem. According to their deserts, so shall they be repaid. Chema, with Hashem's hatred, Litzarav, to his enemies. Gemul la'oivav, right? Paying back to his enemies. La'iyim Gemul Yishalem. Requital shall be made to God's enemies. Requital to the distant lands. It's like you can't get any more explicit than that. It's like I think this is a very compelling argument. He has another puzzle we won't go into, but this is Sarna's theory, and he quotes another example of someone who changed it. Isaac Leeser, no relation. Lesher, I don't know that we're related, but he published the Ashkenazi Siddur in America in 1848. I believe I was listening to a podcast with Rabbi Moshe Taub on it, and he has a new book which talks a lot about the early American stories. I believe he talks about Isaac Leeser. So he changed some of the tefillah. I'm not going to get into all the things, but he writes over here, whether Rabbi Muscat's amended version of Hanotein Teshua does win widespread favor remains to be seen. In the meanwhile, it is worth recalling the words of the great American religious historian Martin Marty, a double firsty name, okay? In connection with these kinds of prayers, governments, he wisely observed, ultimately receive the prayers that they deserve. So Jonathan Sarna is saying, I think what he's trying to say is, you don't really need to change the tefillah, Rabbi Muscat, in all due respect. It was already a diss. It was already a subversive form of dissent where we do, it's like the shmir. I don't know what the shmir is. You give certain, maybe sometimes it's called ishtadlus, shtadlonis, whatever. It's like sort of almost like pro forma. We have to give respect, but we know that this is not legit. Now, in response to Rabbi Sarna's response, Rabbi Muscat said, like, very strong argument. He explained his position that he had already felt uncomfortable with some of the language in the tefillah, but when Obama came and there was a UN resolution that he decided to not use his veto power, a whole explanation. That's when he came to a decision that he felt it was inappropriate to keep giving all these honorifics and forms of flattery to the U.S. government. Whether you agree or disagree, that's what he felt. That he spoke to his posig. He didn't say who he was. And he went and explained that his position did not break halacha. Wasn't he's using the prayer, but taking out some of the most flowery language. But then Rabbi Muscat makes a very good point, and this is something which I think brings us full circle to the question that I don't have a explicit, direct answer to, which is often the case in these contemporary halacha questions. But I would raise for you this question of the following. So Rabbi Muscat says, I recognize. Here it is. In fact, he says, Rabbi Sarna, Jonathan Sarna said, the whole pair was subversive, and therefore just leave it the same because the whole thing is a backhanded sort of a dissent. So he says like this, no, in fact, my intention is just the opposite. Precisely because 2017 America is not Tsarist Russia, and you could say the same thing, hopefully, about 21st century Canada, I am able to remove the gratuitous and at times historically subversive flattery from this prayer. How fortunate we are that in 2017 America, we can speak honestly in our prayer without subversion. We can praise our government with sincerity, truly grateful for the freedoms it provides us. Precisely because there is so much for us to be genuinely grateful for, we need not use this prayer as a tool to flatter leaders lest they change our fate. In other words, have faith in your government on the one hand, but also don't feel the need to compel to give them fake flattery because this is a free country, this is a democracy. Furthermore, I do not believe that removing the current language flattering the government officials is tantamount to disrespecting the government. Notably, no such language exists in the prayer for the state welfare of the state of Israel, which is a good transition for us. So basically, he wants to guide their counsel, but he doesn't ask God to bless them personally. So I think that there's a lot of truth to what he's saying. In other words, where does this come from, this whole tradition? And I don't have a proof to this, but I thought the Chasam Sofer says the Rabboseinu shebeTalmud, the rabbis of the Talmud, very vague statement. I think there was an awareness that people were reading these letters. There were censors, there were people around. I don't have any proof, but when I first heard, I think Rabbi Korobkin quoted this Chasam Sofer in the Pirkei Avos, I was like, I think that he's coming out strong because he was a very prominent rabbi, and you had to cover yourself. You couldn't explicitly say no more prayers for the government because they are evil. You can't do that. At the same time, we live in a different world today. Yes, there's anti-Semitism and things have changed, but I think that we're coming to a point where we have to question, I guess is the strongest way I would say it, we should question this tradition of flattery, and if Jonathan Sarna is correct, Rabbi Muscat is taking it taking it for granted, but saying, I'd rather not be giving false forms of support. I'd rather give the support to what I believe in, which he does believe in. We should be praying for the government, because the government, as we mentioned, it's better than anarchy. But at the same time, we could have, explicit forms of I don't want to say not dissent, but we disagree, and we could give your political opinion, maybe not from the pulpit, if you want to, not put your mix your religious role and your political role, but as a community, the community should feel, ideally, again, like you said before, there are modes of anti-Semitism. There's more fear that is felt, and people are experiencing a more, a heightened sense of insecurity. But at the same time, this is not Tsarist Russia, and therefore we should feel, and if we don't feel, we should feel free to express our opinions, and if we don't, then that's a step backwards. So that's Rabbi Muscat's argument against Jonathan Sarna. I think it's a strong argument, but should we be praying for the government of Canada? I leave it up to you, but I think there are those that have taken out some of the flowery language because it's more to support a government to do the right things as opposed to...
Did we not take out some? I thought he took out some.
So, Rabbi,
I don't want to say
Rabbi, I'm okay with thinking the government or thinking Canada, because at the end of the day we do live in Canada. I'm okay with thinking Canada because we do live in Canada, and we right.
We should be grateful for the freedoms that we have, 100%.
But not the Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
Why Iceland? I don't want to.
Right. Why are you giving the? You should give the office maybe.
I'm happy to thank Canada.
Yes.
Because
right.
I live in Canada.
A lot of people feel that way. Even I would say that's one of the things. Lesser. He took out like Isaac Leeser, I don't know how to pronounce the name, but he took out it was almost like even also praising the military and they should succeed. So people have pulled it back a little bit, and I don't know exactly what Rabbi Muscat was advocating for, but maybe I believe he was saying praise the office, or even I saw some of Jonathan Sarna gives all the history, but there were some that said in the U.S. that they praised the Congress while in session. Meaning, it's not you, it's just the office of Congress. But when you're not in session, we don't care about you at all. But I hear what Chaim's saying. In other words, depersonalize it. It's not about a particular person. It's about the democracy and the freedom of religion, all those things. I definitely see that.
Definitely not the Russian.
Right. We do. I think we still in the U.S. They don't. A lot of shuls don't say. They don't praise the actual president. Here we say Rosh HaMemshala, I believe. Yeah.
Don't we praise here the Queen or the King or whatever it is now?
Yeah.
Do we actually praise the Prime Minister, or we just praise the?
I think.
Rosh
I don't know.
No, but it specifically says
I don't
the
know.
Queen and
I'm actually not sure. You're a gabbai.
First of all, I
Doesn't-
wouldn't say it if I was. But second of all, during the week, we don't say it.
Yeah. So I actually don't know I don't know the actual text. There's different texts that are used. I believe that some have taken out the particular people and the roles. They're just like the general government. But I don't know exactly. Okay, part 2. Ready for part 2, or you want to?
I just was going to say, I feel like the Rosh HaMemshala is the only thing that's really covered here. All we have is Malchut and Shlomeir, right? So how could you even talk about the Memshala?
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
The Memshala is not when we go to our sources, right?
When you
they're
say
not
we,
talking
what?
Sorry, when we talk about our sources in the text,
There's different
right?
formula. The text is not important. It seems to be Chazal are just saying, and in Tanakh to pray for the government, but the actual
But they say
text
Malchut specifically, though.
was composed in different formulations, a lot of different kinds.
I mean, all the Yirmiyahu one, right? That's
Yeah. I hear what you're, in other words, Shlom L'Malchus.
I'd be
right.
surprised if we were actually doing a prayer for the Memshala at all. I'd just say do it for the
Malchus.
Rosh Memshala. Call it there.
Malchus, you mean?
Well, Malchus, but in Canada, it's very easy to say that the prime minister is appointed by the king. Right?
You're saying to do the prayer for the Memshala or not?
I mean, I just feel like if you're going to cut anything, you should cut the prayer for the Memshala, not the prayer for the Rosh Memshala. He's the Malchut. He's the.
So what are you going to say?
that's
Rosh Memshala, but not the Memshala.
I mean, if I
I
was
think
going
it
to cut
says
anything,
Ha-Melech v'Hachol Sarav. I don't know if it says Rosh Memshala. I think it's for sure it says Melech v'Chol Sarav because we changed it from the Queen. But I don't know if it says Rosh Hashanah. I don't know.
My second question was, this is all contingent on, freedom of speech and living in America, right?
Yeah.
But in the arc of Jewish history, we've had freedoms and they've been revoked, and we've had freedoms and they've been revoked.
That's what some want to argue. Don't take it out because it's a prayer for us that we want the government to be good and to give us freedoms.
I'm just wondering if Sarna has like a recall, like at a certain point in time, God forbid something happens in America, and he says, "Okay,
no,
we'll reinstitute the flowery
So he's a
language."
historian. He's not giving practical advice. It's interesting in this article. He goes close to it, but he's just giving us the history that you shouldn't think, as people do. I think people think, "Oh, we pray for the government. We love." This is a long history. That's what Chief Rabbi Hertz was saying in his siddur. This goes back all the way, generations. Jonathan Sarna is saying. Yeah, it goes back all those generations, and all those generations had this, honorifics that were really acts of defiance in a way. So he's giving us the history. What we do with that history, as historians don't really. They're not so good at that, giving that advice, which is probably they should be in their lane. And but he was just clarifying for the historical record. You want to change the prayer, implying you think that it's praiseworthy. That it's a praise and it's whatever, but in the fact it is backhanded.
So the question goes on to Rav Muscat then, right? Like when
Rabbi Muscat has it. I could show if you want to see his response. He's aware of Jonathan Sarna's argument. He says he was aware before he wrote his thing. But either way, okay. So this one, we don't really have time to go through a proper treatment of the whole topic. We'll start. And if the Chaver wants to do more, we can. So the prayer for the state of Israel is traditionally added after the prayer for the government. So Reishit, Tzmichat, Geulateinu, has the redemption already begun? Is part number 2, the debate over the prayer for the state of Israel. So I utilized this book, as I mentioned before, Avraham Steinberg, Prayer for the Welfare of the State and for the Welfare of the State of Israel. And in this book, he has a nice introduction where he gives this whole, overview of the debates between in Chazal and Shammai and Hillel and L'chulgus L'Shem Shemayim, and how we should recognize that this debate is a halakhic one and a hashkafic one, and you shouldn't see it as a political and personal attack. And he writes something I think is very, very important. He says, most unfortunate, this is in source number 17, most unfortunate the dispute regarding the significance of the events of our time, as a result of which there is dispute about whether to recite or not recite the phrase, the first flowering of our redemption in the prayer of the State of Israel, has descended from a purely halachic and ideological question to the political and emotional realms, and has sometimes even been attended by verbal and even physical violence. Many of the Jewish people who argue vociferously and heatedly regarding the issue of the significance of the historical events of our time and about the reciting of the prayer for the welfare of the State of Israel are not aware at all about the halachic basis of the dispute and are certainly not aware of the relevant halachic sources. They do so because of habit or because of the education they receive from their home and from the Beit Midrash study hall, or because of their communal ethnic identification, but not because of any personal knowledge, the latter being essential for every significant argument. Furthermore, some of the Jews who are involved in these vehement arguments trample upon the honor of their opponents in the most brutal manner and show scorn to Torah scholars in accordance with the statement. And, in other words, it's gotten out of hand. It's gotten out of hand. Today, in our own shul, there are people who feel it's their mitzvah to go over to other people and tell them what they shouldn't say, what they should say. And it's important to recognize that this is a real debate. There are significant opinions. You could have a very strong opinion, but this is part of the effort to become more informed. And I also wasn't, before learning about it, I didn't know so much about the topic. I knew some of the questions we'll deal with a little bit about the flowering of the redemption, but I try to inform myself and become more of an informed, opinion here. And I think it's also important, this is another part of the introduction in Rabbi Steinberg's book. He quotes from the Chazon Ish. It's important to recognize that the Chazon Ish writes, this is not a chiddush, but I think it's important, it shows the significance of recognizing the halachic authority of a person to follow their own, the halachic right of a person to follow their own Rav. And he writes, it appears that the principle which states that in questions of Torah import one follows the more stringent view only applies if neither of the two rabbis of the dispute is his rabbi. In other words, you can just say, well, you should be machmir, you should go whatever. It's hard to really say what would be machmir in this situation. But he says, if your Rav, if your teacher is one of the two opinions, even if he's the more lenient one, then you have every right to go and follow your Rav. And he says that this applies even after the Rav's death. If you have this particular viewpoint, you are allowed and instructed actually to follow your rabbi. So there are different opinions. I'm not going to solve the question now, but I think we'll try to touch on some of the flashpoints of this debate, and bearing in mind that there are significant halachic views on both sides of the issue, and the person should recognize that Klal Yisrael is diverse. There's different views, and we could stand by our own position, but not feel that someone else is illegitimate as long as they are following a viewpoint within the broad spectrum of Orthodox Jewry. Okay, so let's go through some of the history here. It actually became a little bit more, as I researched it, a little bit more of a history shir than a halacha shir, but I think it's interesting just so people know some of the history. So if you take a look at source number 18, there was an article that was printed in 1948 in Hatzofeh, September 20th, 1948. And in this article, it was then later printed also in Haaretz. In this article, it writes that the chief rabbinate approved of a particular formulation of its prayer for the Medina Yisrael. It says here, it's a little bit blurry, but it has here Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog and Rav Amiel, who was the chief Sephardic rabbi, and they approved of the following formulation. You could see it, it's a little bit indented in source number 18. Avinu shebashamayim tzor Yisrael v'golo borich et mininat Yisrael Reishit Tzmichat Geulateinu. I'm just going to stop right there because that is the main source of the debate in this prayer, whether we can say that is the beginning of the flowering of the redemption, Hakamat Medina, the establishment of the state of Israel. Where did this prayer formulation come from? So you can take a look. I got from the appendix. If you don't like looking at your phone, I can pass this to you if you want. But in the appendix to this work, he has a handwritten version of Rav Herzog. You can take a look. It does have the phrase of Reishit Tzmichat Geulateinu. And also another person who was involved in the formulation of the prayer. I don't exactly know who wrote what, but there were some comments given by Shai Agnon, S.Y. Agnon, who was a poet and won the Nobel Prize, I believe, for literature. He has a few corrections, but noteworthy is Reishit Tzmichat Geulateinu is still there with no corrections. That was seemingly agreed upon. In their RCA Siddur, it writes that he was observant. I didn't know that, but I guess we have to do more research about him. I know Jeffrey Sachs has like a whole organization that deals with Shai Agnon's literature. So that's an interesting personality. Maybe for a different time we could look into the life, which I also need to do more. I would love to research that personality. He was a poet. He was a writer. Maybe poet is the wrong word, but he wrote novels as well. And he contributed to the authoring of the prayer for the state of Israel. I'll just share with you a story that Rabbi J.D. Schachter shared with us to show you that even within the religious Zionist world, this was a debate. I think it goes without saying, and we don't have enough time to go through all of it, it goes without saying that those outside of the religious Zionist world took issue with this phrase. We know the Shalosh Shvuos, the three oaths, that is in the Gemara Ksubis, and many said that it's not a positive thing to go and to conquer the land of Israel as it violates the Shalosh Shvuos. We're not going to get into that whole argument, Sat Merav and everything like that. We'll just leave that for a different time, and we can do that. But assuming that it's the positive occurrence in the founding of the state of Israel, and that for whatever reason the three Shvuos, the three oaths, are maybe not binding, or maybe they were never halachic to begin with. So within that camp, there still is a debate. Even today, whether we should say Reishit Tzmichat Geulateinu. So Rabbi J.D. Schachter told us that in 1981, when he became the rabbi of the Jewish Center in Manhattan, which is, I guess, a flagship modern Orthodox, religious Zionist shul in the Upper West Side in New York, Rabbi Norman Lamb was the previous rabbi, and Rabbi J.D. Schachter gets up on a Shabbos morning, and he's handed a little maybe it was even laminated, like we have, to say for the prayer for the state of Israel. And he's looking through it. He doesn't want to mess it up, but he's looking at it. He doesn't recognize this prayer at all. And he goes over to Rabbi Lamb and he says, "What happened? What is this? Where's the regular prayer for the state of Israel?" So Rabbi Lamb explained that he preferred to use a prayer. I believe it was written by Rabbi Brody from England. He preferred that prayer because Rabbi Lamb did not want to contextualize the state of Israel in a language of redemption, and he therefore did not say the prayer of the regular Avinu Shebashamayim prayer because it had the phrase Reishit Tzmichat Geulateinu, the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. And notably, his Rebbe, I don't think he said this at the time, but it's just so you should know, it's in the RCA Siddur, source number 20. You can take a look. Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik chose some ardent Zionists, including Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, choose to omit the phrase entirely. Others amend it by prefacing the phrase with the word Shitehei, may it be the beginning of our redemption. Most, however, recite the prayer as is found here, as written by the chief rabbinate. So, Rabbi Lamb was certainly a Zionist. Rabbi Soloveitchik, he had a different view on whether we can say this. Now, Rabbi Lamb did tell Rabbi Schachter that you are now the rabbi, and therefore what you choose, I will 100% support you either way. So I believe Rabbi J.J. Schachter did introduce saying the prayer, the regular standard prayer. I don't think he went with the Rabbi Lamb one. But even within the camp of the religious Zionist camp, we have some debate over this phrase. Where does the phrase even come from? So another article by Rabbi J.J. Schachter, in his introduction to the Koren Machzer for, I think, Yom Ha'atzmaut, he says that it's likely that it comes from a letter or a number of letters that Rav Kook wrote, In 1917, Rav Kook wrote a letter to Rothschild thanking him for his involvement with the Balfour Declaration. You can take a look at source number 21. And in this letter, Rav Kook writes, he doesn't use the exact language, but he says it's the Reishit Hatza'at Shel Tzmichat Keren Yeshuat Yisrael. That this idea that we have Reishit Tzmichat Geulateinu is already sort of alluded to. So, what was Rabbi Lamb's issue with including the phrase, and is there an issue with having it today? So, very briefly, this is an exchange in source number 22, an exchange between Rabbi Lamb and Rabbi Schubert Spiro in the journal Shema in 1974. Rabbi Lamb writes as follows: "A second confession that I urge upon those whose guilt is now exposed." This is after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, which was a time of great upheaval, and people were really questioning, the role of the government of the state of Israel, and the war was very devastating, many losses. So Rabbi Lamb writes as follows. He writes that we should say al chet, we should give an open confession for the sin of premature messianism. This presumptuousness is common to two disparate groups: those whose messianism is particularly nationalistic, and those to whom it is completely internationalist. In 1967, a large number of Israelis and some Americans were convinced that the Six-Day War proved we were in indefinite, pre-redemptive messianic era. And some even said so in the prayers we recite for Israel, Atchalta de Geula, the beginnings of the redemption, not the flowerings of their beginning, but literally their beginnings of the redemption. The secularized versions of this theological hubris was cockiness about Israel's power. After Yom Kippur 1973, I am more skeptical than ever. A messianic war would have been on the 6-day style. Let us talk no more of tagging current history with labels that are symptoms of nothing more than our superficiality and superciliousness. Messiah will come and may be here, and maybe we can help this him come faster. But let us have no more talk of his imminent, of his concubine. It's all cut off over there. Rabbi Lamb says in a different quotation that it's not messianism, it's messianism. Messiism. It's messy. It's not. It's very. He wants to say it's presumptuous. It leads to many people. If it doesn't happen, it's very disappointing, and he has a lot of points there. In response to Rabbi Lamb's writing, Schubert Spiro wrote very, very passionately countering Rabbi Lamb. When the state of Israel was established in 1948, many of us believed that we had entered an era of Atchata de Geula, the beginning of the Messianic redemption. Our conviction that we are now living in an era of insipid Messianic redemption was strengthened and confirmed by the wars of 1956 and 1967. And the recent Yom Kippur War did nothing to shake our belief. Yet, Norman Lamb, writing in the wake of the Yom Kippur War, urges those of us who believe in Israeli messianism to recite a confession, right, for the sin of premature messianism. Rabbi Lamb argues that Yom Kippur War has proven us wrong, and he says, Rabbi Schubert says there's no way. He says you can see the signposts, you can see history is showing us this direction. Jews are coming in mass, it's flourishing. All these arguments that we've heard that we can't go through all of it, but Rabbi Schubert did not back down, and he said that our conviction is stronger than ever, and it's confirmed, and therefore, how could you, he even calls into question Rabbi Lamb, how could you call yourself a Zionist, I believe he asks. Rabbi Lamb responded and said, I believe there was another response, but he said, I'm not denying that it could be the Messianic era. I just don't know. I don't have the cockiness to presume that I know that it's the Messianic era. Now, it's getting late. Let's just do one more. So, another person who revisited this question is the current president of Yeshiva University, Rabbi Dr. Ari Berman. He quotes this in an article in Tradition. I believe it was in honor of Rabbi Lamb, who passed away in I think 2021 or 2020. And he writes in an article, Religious Zionism Moving History Forward, he submits a third approach. He says, that I must admit that reading the words of these two leading thinkers, I cannot identify with the linear messianism of Rabbi Spiro. It seems to me forced and too simple to interpret each step of Israel's historic journey in a way that shows an upward progression in the messianic process. But at the same time, I do not share Rabbi Land's perspective to solely consider the practical benefits of having a Jewish state and divorce the story of Israel from the destiny of Israel. And then he wants to argue for a third approach. It's not messianism, it's not messianism, it's what he wants to say is an age of opportunity. He wants to say it's modeled after Abraham, who devoted his life to Jewish people and to the world. And I'll just quote from one last piece over here that he writes here. He says, I see this every... Jews in the diaspora community today, living largely as beneficiaries of democratic freedoms, are able to model our values and influence society in ways almost unimaginable in history. And he talks about how he sees this in his own work as a president of Yeshiva University. As such, we have an enormous opportunity to exemplify, present, and communicate our values to both the broader Jewish people and the nations of the world. The Torah and its ideas and values are our wisdom and our truth, and our community is uniquely positioned to project that truth and to be its exemplars. In other words, he's saying maybe it's not messianism, but it's a great opportunity that the Jewish community has at this stage to influence the world through using the state of Israel and its position at the world stage. And that's what he wants to argue is true for diaspora Jews as well, that religious Zionism, and this is why he came back. He was living in Israel and he came back to help move history forward. And that's what he believes is really the religious Zionist understanding, that we have an opportunity now to move history forward, to utilize the opportunities that we have and not to squander the moment. And I recently heard from him in Florida. We went to a rabbinic Yarchei Kala, and he spoke about the same thing. That he said, we are living at a time that if we lose the opportunities now, if we don't take advantage and look at ourselves as living at some sort of a crossroads, which direction we're going in here, we don't know. But we're at a crossroads. It would be a shame to squander this opportunity, whether it's bringing the Mashiach or not. He said, I'm not taking a position on that, but it is a wonderful time of opportunity. Yes, there's obviously concerns and there's other dangers looming, but at the same time, look at the political position that Israel is in. We would have never thought, it would be in such a. It's a bigger discussion. I don't want to start it at the end of this year, but needless to say, the redemption is a process. It is not a binary yes or no, and that's why perhaps as we go into Pesach, there's Daled Lashonos K'ula, there's 4 languages of redemption. It happens over a process. Where we are in that process is debated. Maybe we could do a different share because I felt maybe there's more to talk about. But for now, that remains a debate. Whether we say Reishit Geulateinu, our shul's minhag is to say it. Whether we don't say it, but we recognize that it's a tremendous advantage, an opportunity, and a flowering of Jewish life, and obviously a tremendous blessing. No one's going to deny that. Within this camp. But the question would be: are we able to say with definitive, that we are at Tzmichat de Geula, we are at the beginning of the redemption? That seems to be the debate, and we'll hold it over here. And thank you for coming. Shkoyach.